In this video, we explore the disturbing case of a teenager who crossed an unimaginable boundary, killing his own parents in a twisted effort to gain attention online. This teenage girl enjoyed watching how-to videos on makeup, dancing with friends, and sharing funny videos on TikTok. Later, on an ordinary weeknight, her parents were found dead in bed, which was the worst thing that could have happened. The world mourned with this girl who had just lost her parents, especially when she went on TikTok to share her pain. But this teenager's grief-stricken exterior concealed a much darker truth. This is about Sarah Grace Patrick. When the cops received a call at 7:15 a.m. on February 20th, 2025, they took it very seriously. On the other end of the line was a young girl's voice. She was crying so hard that she could barely form words as she tried to explain what was happening in her family's home. Sarah Grace Patrick, 16, was the caller. It turned out that her 5-year-old sister Jay had just come in after making a horrifying discovery and had run to her room. That was because she woke up a little early and went into her parents' room to find them both asleep in their bed. When the police arrived, they took Sarah and Jay, who were both in a great deal of pain, to receive professional help. In the meantime, the cops went inside to look into it. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. In fact, the entire house appeared clean and there were no signs of a break-in or damage. But when the police reached the second floor, things looked very different. The kids' rooms were clean, but the master bedroom was hiding some very bad things. When the police went through the doorway and looked at the bed, they found Kristen and James to be cold. At first glance, it looked like they were just sleeping, but when they looked more closely, they noticed something else. There was blood all over the pillows and bedsheets. Both adults appeared to be injured with what looked like multiple gunshot wounds. What is interesting is that the cops were able to tell almost right away that the injuries were not self-inflicted because of the angles of the projectiles. Of course, this means that neither of them killed the other. Kristen and James were both declared dead at the scene. Based on the condition of their bodies, the police also knew that they had probably died a few hours before the girls woke up. As a side point, the son was not with the family that night, so there were only 4 people in the house at the time. Now that 3 children had lost their parents and 2 people had been killed in their own beds, the police had the horrible job of trying to figure out what had happened. When the police first looked at the crime scene, they saw that the house itself had a very strange story to tell. Except for the master bedroom, every room was spotless as usual. There was nothing out of place in the house, and it was clean and neat, and there were no signs of a fight or an attempt to break in. Also, nothing had been taken from the property. Since this was the case, it pretty much ruled out the possibility of a failed crime. In that case, why would they sneak upstairs and kill a couple who were sleeping, only to fail to search the entire house? The cops did not understand any of this, to be honest. It did not make sense to me either. It became clear at the crime scene. No murder weapon was ever found, which made the case even more difficult to solve. Their neighbors were few and far between, which made it even less likely that surveillance footage from their homes could help. In the days that followed, the police searched the property thoroughly, looking for even the smallest piece of forensic evidence. At the same time, the extended family said there would be a $5,000 reward for anyone who could help them catch the person responsible. Kristen and James Brock, the parents, and their 3 children, Sarah Grace Patrick, 16, her younger brother Donnie, and her younger sister Jay, 5, made up the family. They lived together on a beautiful piece of land in the countryside near Carlton, Georgia. The land was surrounded by fields and trees. Sarah and Donnie were from Kristen's first marriage to Daniel Patrick, which was a difficult one that ended in divorce in July 2018. This made things even more challenging. As is often the case, custody quickly became the main issue in their dispute. Both parents fought for full rights, but in the end, the court decided on joint custody with Kristen having primary care. Daniel was left in a very bad situation. Sadly, he could only see them on holidays and alternate weekends. This meant that he would only get to spend short periods of time with his kids. Soon after that, Kristen met James Brock. After that, they fell in love quickly and moved in together, which was described as a hurricane relationship. Of course, James stepped up to be the stepfather, and luckily he seemed to be good at it as well. After that, when Kristen and James had their daughter Jay, the family finally felt complete. The Brocks became well known in their neighborhood because they attended Carlton's Catalyst Church, which was nearby. James liked to make jokes, but Kristen was the bubbly, friendly, and caring one in the group. Based on news stories in the area, it also seems like their kids were liked by their neighbors and the rest of the community. On the outside, the Nolans seemed like a happy, religious family from the South. But in fact, things were much more complicated. It turned out that both James and Kristen used to be users. Things became so bad for them that they got into trouble with the law. There was a serious drug problem for Kristen, which was one of the main reasons she broke up with Daniel. As a side point, this is also the main reason he fought for custody. Even though not much is known about Daniel, it is easy to see why he would be concerned. He believed that Kristen's drug use was very harmful to the development of both Sarah and Donnie, and it turned out that James Brock fought the same struggles. According to court records, the Patrick family told a different story, though. They said that having a renewed faith in God and being close to each other had given them a new way to start over. They were determined to leave those bad times behind. It appeared that way, at least on the outside. But the truth is that Daniel was not really sure himself. He also believed that Kristen and James were simply putting on an act to keep social workers away. He was very afraid because his view of reality was very different, and he thought that his kids were often around meth and weed in the house. Things became much worse for him when his son Donnie showed up with a cut on his body and said that James had hit him with a belt. It was not a surprise that he went to social services that same day and asked them to review the parenting decisions again. Only 2 days before Christmas in 2019, he made an urgent move. In this paper, he said that both of his kids looked like they were not receiving enough care and were also behind on medical and dental care. He was not the only one worried. His 11-year-old daughter, Sarah, also said in her own statement that she would rather live with her dad. Sarah would also tell her teacher later that she was scared to go home because people were worried for her safety. They called the cops, and she told them the same thing. She even told them about the drug packaging she had found in the house and how it smelled like meth. Being a parent who does drugs is already bad enough. They are still mean and careless, but doing them in front of your own kids is even worse. In a way, it was her responsibility to tell teachers and the police what was going on. That should not have been the case, but no one else was going to change it. It is unfortunate that the courts did not give Daniel full custody, but his emergency filing did seem to buy him some time, as he received Christmas custody for 4 days. Things looked worse for Kristen and James as more information about their past came to light. At that moment, social services discovered that James already had a record. They found out that he was caught in 2017 for having meth on him and was given probation. A year later, he violated his probation by committing a number of other crimes, such as shoplifting, theft, possessing weed, and obstructing an officer. He would receive even more probation and time in jail for that series of offenses, and it was clear that he was not acting like a reliable dad. It was clear that the evidence against Kristen and James was growing, and by October 2020, the judges had finally changed the arrangement. After that, Sarah and Donnie would spend the weekdays living with their dad and only see Kristen on certain weekends. Even though Daniel did not get full custody, it was a big step in the right direction. In his mind, that meant making their home safer and more stable for his kids. Even though they won the custody battle, Kristen and James still had problems. In December 2022, this time tragedy struck in a very different way. Sadly, James suffered a massive heart attack out of the blue, and doctors also found that he was now in advanced heart failure. They also said he would not survive if he did not have surgery right away. He did survive, thankfully, but only after surgeons implanted a left ventricular assist device, an LVAD, which works like a mechanical pump to help move blood around the body. You will have to trust me on this, but it all has to do with the case. Long story short, James's pump had a monitor on it, a device that he would always have with him. Anything that was not in sync with his heart would trigger a very loud warning. Also, let's just say that these precautions are 100% certain to work. Even though Kristen and James had experienced problems in the past, things seemed to be improving for both of them by early 2023. You would not believe how much better things seemed between Kristen and Daniel, considering they used to be angry with each other, and all three parents were seen together at some of their kids' events, sitting in the same room and talking without any problems. Since things were going so well for the family, what happened on the night that two of them were killed? From the outside, Kristen and James did not seem to have any enemies, at least not in the last few years. There was not much reason for someone to want to hurt them, unless a ghost from their drug-filled past came back to haunt them. But cracks were slowly appearing behind this smooth family picture. For instance, Kristen and James might now have been the worst people for each other. It is known that things went badly for them about a year before their wedding in 2022, when James asked the court for a protective order against his fiancée. He said he was afraid for the safety of himself and his daughter. They got into a very heated argument, and Kristen got into the family car with Jay and Donnie still inside. She then tried to run him over while he was standing in the barn. Additionally, he said Kristen had been hitting him often, breaking things, and even threatening to kill him. He also believed she might have switched from using hard drugs to control drugs. But here is the strange part. In the end, James decided to drop all of his charges. The protective order against his fiancée never went through, and they got married in December 2023, just a few months after the order was filed. Or did James simply hide everything for the sake of the family? Did Kristen change for the better? What is even stranger is whether this had anything to do with their deaths, or if it is just another sad backstory. Based on the trajectory of the bullets, we know that neither of them was to blame. As the evidence showed, neither Kristen nor James pointed the gun at themselves and then at each other. This means that someone else is responsible. Who and why, though? The crime scene also did not provide any answers, which was unfortunate. There were no DNA samples or fingerprints, and there were no signs of a break-in that night. Both of their ex-partners were located and identified, and since there was no sign of an outsider, the police had to look inside at the only other people in the house. It is hard to believe we are talking about kids, but that night Donnie was with his dad, so there were only two other people. There was Jay, who was young, and Sarah, who was 16. And as the police dug deeper, they saw that Sarah's story did not seem to make sense. As the days turned into weeks and no one was arrested, the community came together to support these three kids. Things were happening in the background, though, and people started to pay more attention to the case, especially in the true crime community. And let's just say Sarah's life was not quite making sense. Sarah, like many other kids her age, was online all the time and had accounts almost everywhere. She used Instagram and Facebook, but TikTok was by far her favorite. And let's just say she started posting a lot on that platform in the weeks after her parents were killed. Now, to be fair to her, there is no set way to deal with loss. That is something everyone does differently. And I can imagine how terrible it would be to lose your parents so suddenly. In this case, though, most people would think that some of Sarah's online behavior is strange. It was not long before people watching, and even some in her own family, began to have doubts. Let's go back to her first Facebook post before we look at TikTok. Sarah had to write this message on her dad's account 4 days after the killings because the police had taken her phone as evidence. She wrote in this post about waking up to her sister yelling and then finding her parents on the ground shot. In addition, she said that some parts of the news stories were not true, but she did not say which ones. She also wrote that she was praying for the person who killed her parents and loved ones. She also thanked her church for praying for them. After a few weeks, there was a funeral at Catalyst Church. Sarah gave a speech in front of hundreds of people, and the whole thing was caught on video. I am not sure what she meant when she said she was sorry. It is possible that she felt bad about crying in front of everyone, or maybe it was more than that. Sarah kept posting on social media, mostly on TikTok, for a few weeks. A month after the killings in late March, she even told people on her dad's Facebook page that she would be posting all of her updates on TikTok, and to get more people to follow her, she asked them to do so there. The reason I'm telling you this story now is because her TikTok account has been deleted, possibly because her lawyers advised her to do so, but the internet does not forget, and enough of her videos were later saved and then reposted. For Sarah, it does not look very good anymore. It was Sarah who made a video of herself crying with her makeup running, along with the video using a cool sound. They do not know it, but a year from now, my 5-year-old sister and I will find them shot dead in our home without a reason. They will not get to see me graduate, walk down the aisle, or even say goodbye. A slideshow of happy family pictures played after a short video. When the video started, there was a strange cut to a picture of Sarah getting ready for a party. The next picture was of the funeral. It was odd and lacked tone, which is what a lot of people thought. Watching nervous people try so hard to fit in gets old. It hurts when I hear her scream for her mommy and daddy. Children who had been through a lot were being honest and making painful statements. People were even more divided when it was shown to the whole world in this way. Some felt sorry for them, while others were suspicious. But Sarah did more than just post on her account, because by June 2025, just a few months after the killings, she had contacted a true crime TikTok channel called Allegedly and asked them to cover her parents' case. Sarah would say that the killings of her parents were a big hit and even provide insider information. Now, the person who made the video did create one about the case, and Sarah could be seen commenting on it. As before, this would cause a wide range of responses. Some would see it as her trying to keep the case from the public eye, while others would see it as a form of entertainment. It was clear that Sarah loved her mother very much, and almost all of her posts were about how much she missed Kristen. For weeks, her sadness was real and easy to understand. It seemed like things were changing, though, by early summer. What looked like a daughter's sadness was now beginning to feel like an act. And when people looked at Sarah, one of the main things they thought was whether she was just sad, or whether she was enjoying the attention that the tragedy had brought her. And that question was not just being asked on the internet, since the police had already begun to quietly look at her by this point. The case changed completely in July 2025. Even after months of hard work, the police had no proof that the attack came from outside. With this in mind, they had to question what they thought was impossible. Also, since they were killed, was it possible that someone on the property did it? Out of the 5 people in the family who might be responsible, let's start with James and Kristen. They were the ones who were killed, so it could not have been them. Then there was Donnie, but he had been away all night. Meanwhile, Jay was there. She was 5 years old at the time. There was now only one person left. Obviously the person who called the police and who seemed to have been sleeping through the gunshots and James's alarm. If you look more closely, you can see the person who might have had both a motive and an opportunity. Obviously, I am talking about Sarah. Early in July, officers thought they had enough evidence to charge Sarah, so they issued a warrant for her arrest. By July 8th, she was in police custody. Everyone in the neighborhood was shocked. However, the investigators were confident in their theory. Later that day, the sheriff's office said she had been arrested. They said there was a lot of evidence, and discussions with the FBI supported this. The police have not shared much of what they know about Sarah yet, because the case is still open. So for now, all we can do is piece together what little we believe we know. Let's just say that many things do not seem right, even from this limited perspective. Let's begin by talking about the front door. Investigators say that there was no forced entry and that everything appeared to be fine. One door was left open that morning, which was the only thing that seemed unusual. This could have been done to make it look like there had been a break-in, or it could simply be how the family lived. Since they lived in a safe area and had pets, it was possible for them to leave a door open overnight. The most important thing for the police was that nothing was stolen. A lot of things were missing from the house, and that should have been the first thing people noticed. If someone had come to the house to rob them, they probably would have taken their electronics, jewelry, or cash, but instead they just left it all behind. It is clear that the killer did not have a motive for robbery. They wanted James and Kristen dead. The killer's actions showed that they were there for a reason, and they did not care about anything else. There is also the matter of the gun. The police found the weapon that was used in the killings, and they were surprised by what they discovered. It turns out that the gun was actually owned by James and Kristen. It had been kept in a safe place in the house, but the killer had found it and used it against them. This means that the killer knew the house well and knew where the gun was kept. This was a huge blow to Sarah's story, as it made it even more likely that someone who lived in the house was responsible. The gun was a 9mm handgun that James kept for protection. It wasn't just sitting out on a table, it was tucked away, which means the shooter knew exactly where to look. When the police questioned Sarah about this, her story started to shift. She claimed she didn't even know they had a gun in the house, but friends of hers later told investigators that she had mentioned it before. Then there's the issue of the intruder Sarah claimed to hear. She said she heard footsteps and a door closing, but the house's security system, which was active that night, didn't log any doors opening or closing during the time frame of the murders, except for the one she used to run out later. This digital footprint was a silent witness that contradicted her entire timeline. Furthermore, the forensic team found something even more chilling. There was no high-velocity blood spatter on the walls where an outsider would have stood, but there were traces of cleanup attempted in the bathroom, a bathroom Sarah had used before the police arrived. The forensic team's discovery in the bathroom was a turning point. They found trace amounts of blood in the sink drain and on a towel that had been bleached recently. This suggested that the shooter had taken a moment to wash up before discovering the bodies. But the most damning evidence came from James's heart monitor, the LVAD device mentioned earlier. Remember, this device logs every single physiological change and has an incredibly loud alarm. The data from the monitor showed that James's heart stopped at exactly 2:14 a.m. At that same second, the device's internal log recorded that the external alarm was manually silenced and then deactivated. This requires someone to know exactly how the device works and to be standing right over him. An intruder wouldn't know how to silence a specialized medical alarm in the dark within seconds. Sarah had turned over initially. On it, they found search queries from the night before the murders. She had searched for things like how to clean up GSR, gunshot residue, and can a 9mm kill instantly. It was no longer a crime of passion or a sudden outburst. It looked like a cold, calculated execution planned by a 16-year-old. With the digital evidence and the heart monitor logs, the case against Sarah was ironclad. But the question remained, why? Why would a 16-year-old girl execute her parents in cold blood? Investigators began to look into her personal life more deeply. They found that Sarah had been in a relationship with an older man, someone her parents strongly disapproved of. Kristen and James had recently threatened to take away her phone permanently and send her to a strict boarding school if she didn't end the relationship. For Sarah, it seemed, her parents were the only thing standing between her and the life she wanted. In her mind, removing them was the solution. She believed that by acting like a grieving victim on TikTok, she could gain sympathy and inheritance, allowing her to live her life exactly how she pleased. As the case moved toward trial, the legal team for Sarah tried to argue that she was a victim herself, of a broken home, of her parents' past drug use, and of a mental breakdown. However, the prosecution had a different story to tell.
They presented the TikTok videos not as a sign of grief, but as evidence of her Duper's delight, a psychological term for the thrill someone gets from believing they've successfully deceived others. The contrast between her cold, calculated searches about gunshot residue and her tearful, makeup-smeared videos was too much for many to ignore. The court also heard from Jay, the 5-year-old sister, whose innocent but chilling statements about what she saw that night began to fill in the final gaps. Even though Sarah was only 16, the gravity of the crime led the state to make a pivotal decision. They would try her as an adult. The trial concluded with a verdict that many expected but still felt like a punch to the gut for the local community. Sarah was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Because of her age at the time of the crime, she escaped the death penalty, but the judge showed little leniency, sentencing her to 2 consecutive life terms. As for little Jay, she was placed in the permanent custody of her biological father, Daniel, who had managed to stay clean and build a stable life. The house where the murders happened was eventually sold, the proceeds placed in a trust for Jay's future. It's a haunting reminder that behind the filtered, curated lives we see on social media, there can be a darkness that no trend or aesthetic can ever truly hide. Sarah's TikToks remain a digital ghost, a chilling record of a girl who thought she could outsmart the world.